Hello and welcome to the Sovereign Career Podcast. This is episode 3. And my guest today is John Helmer. He calls himself showrunner and podcast host, but really I think of him as much more than that. And I think you'll find out why as we go through this interview. Well, it's not really an interview, John, it's more of a chat, really, a fireside chat. Okay, so let me start by asking you, John, if you can just, because a lot of people who are watching this will probably listen to it as well separately, or may not see it at all and may just be listening, as I would do if I was traveling. Could you just describe where you are broadcasting this from? You know, where I'm hooking up to your mic with here, and where you are in the country.
I'm on the south coast in beautiful sunny Brighton, where I've lived for a number of years. And I'm broadcasting from my back garden studio. I'm very lucky to have this hack shack here. We moved in about 4 years ago and we built this in the back garden before we completely ran out of money. I realise it's great luxury. If people could see the camera there, they'll see a shrouded black shape behind me. It looks a bit like a lumber room, but this is where I shoot all my intros to my podcasts. And that shrouded black shape is my bicycle, which I'm trying to get going again after not cycling for quite a while.
Oh gosh, that sounds very healthy. I'm not sure that we can extend that. It's probably a different podcast, that one, John. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
afraid I do a lot of sedentary work here in my home office here in the Lincolnshire countryside. So we're miles away, and I'm very envious because, of course, being in Brighton, lots of stuff's going on there. I know lots of people who are down in Brighton doing really interesting things. So here I am in Lincolnshire, I love the Lincolnshire Wolds, but I have to say it is a bit of a long way to get. Having said that, I do fill my time with a lot of podcasts. Yours is amongst the top ones that I always listen to. I've got on my playlist. So, and I'm talking about the Learning Hack. And I know that's top 5% globally. And also, I do like to listen to Great Minds on Learning with yourself talking with Donald Clark. Although I don't think you don't do as many of those episodes, do you? What's the cadence?
Yeah, we're doing I think 3 or 4 this year.
Right.
And we would normally do series of 6, but Donald and I both have very busy schedules, and of course I'm launching a new podcast this year as well. So it's kind of getting difficult cramming it all in. So I either need staff to help with this growing workload or more recourse to AI.
Well, I'm going to come to that other podcast in a few minutes because actually that's how we met, I think, in real life, or IRL, as we say. So I'll come to that in a moment. But first, before I do, just to help listeners understand or get a feel for where you are on the AI spectrum and to feel whether or not they can relate to this conversation. If naught is, absolutely low and 10 is high, where do you regard yourself on the AI spectrum, and what does that mean for your work?
It's an interesting question, and it's a difficult one for me to answer because I don't quite know where the edges are. The noughts and the tens. So if I relate it to people I've talked to and events I've been to over the last 6 months or so, at World of Learning, I went to see Erica Farmer giving a kind of introduction to AI and how to use it properly for people. And I thought, well, I'm probably a bit further along the track than most of the people here because I'm using co-work and stuff. But at the same exhibition, within about half an hour of that, I talked to Ashwin Mehta, who is head of AI strategy for the LPI, among various other things. And he says he's using agents entirely to run his business and all the rest of it. So if I take him as 10, if I take him at his word, and the Erica Farmer end of things, without kind of casting any shade there, because all audiences will be a bit mixed ability. I'm somewhere in the middle, but I don't know exactly where. I give talks about AI and podcasting, and I always ask the question, what are you doing? How advanced are you? Where would you put yourself in this spectrum? Lately, I'm beginning to distrust the answers that come back, partly because I think there's a lot of shame about people thinking they're not doing enough. but also there is a kind of negative stigma that attaches in some quarters to AI. Um, and I think that skews the answers that come back. So, I mean, the short answer is I don't know. Uh, I'd say between 5 and 7, a bit further up than some. And we could talk a bit more about exactly what I'm using and what my progress has been with that later on, if you like.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, I think that's a really super answer actually, because it leads me very neatly. I know you didn't know this, but it leads me very neatly into asking you about your new podcast, which you're thinking
Mm,
of, or you are launching. You were thinking of
definitely
launching
launching.
when I was
Definitely.
speaking with you back at Andrew Jacobs Podfest, which was a couple of months ago, a few months
Yeah.
ago. But since then, you've actually got a date, 22nd of May, I think it is, the first one
22nd of
going.
May, we're launching the first one. Um,
What's the title?
the title is The Tech Imaginarium: How Science Fiction Made the Modern World.
Right.
Um,
Well, that's perfect then, because I wanted to ask you if you think there is any inevitability about, when you look at what's happening now with AI and what we've learned in the past 2 or 3 years and how we've imagined it in science fiction, do you think there's an inevitability about where this is all heading? And if so, can you tell us what it is, please?
I think if there was inevitability, then we wouldn't need science fiction, because what is it's about is um, speculations about what might happen. Um, Esri, my co-host on the Tech Imaginarium, says that what everybody wants to know is what happens next, what's going to happen next, both in a kind of macro sense and even a micro sense. The theorist, I think he's a behavioral psychologist, Nick Chater, says that this is the way the mind works. We're a kind of guessing machine. We're trying to guess in any instant what's going to happen next. And as we kind of expand that range of inquiry, we're going to wonder about, we'll be wondering about, when will the Strait of Hormuz be closed so that my energy bills come down again? We might be wondering who's going to win the World Cup. We might be, wondering what's going to happen to our career in the next 5 years. We're going might be wondering who win the local elections. And science fiction really plays to this urge. It's kind of about saying, look, this is what might happen, whether it's a kind of utopia or a dystopia. And I think
Yes.
because of the way that our emotions work as humans, maybe we would give a bit more time to the dystopias, because you know, we want to know, we want to be armed against bad things that potentially might happen. So now that we're looking at AI and what AI is doing to our lives and to our working lives, I think we've got plenty of models to kind of draw possibilities from that come largely from science fiction. So I think it's a real interesting area to launch podcast in. We're talking a lot about predictions. We're doing Asimov and the robot laws. I was watching the Will Smith version of that, I, Robot, just a
Yeah.
couple of
I love
hours
that
ago.
film. I
And
love that
we're
film.
all thinking about terrible things that can happen with AI and beneficial things that can happen with AI and how it
Yeah.
changes us when we interface with machines like this.
But do you think that science fiction writers have sort of, really described already what could happen? I mean, well, sometimes I look at things and I think, oh, yes, well, that was Orwell or whoever it was. I mean, whether or not that's actual science fiction or not, or it's more political, I know. But you look at things and you sort of say, well, oh, they foresaw that sort of, evolving, that environment evolving. Is there any clue that you've come across? Are there clues that you've come across or that you favor that you think, yes, actually, that could be the one? I mean, I know you're talking about dystopia, but that's more about how the human brain is gravitating towards it. What do you think would be more of an outcome that we might expect?
Um, I think that what science fiction writers do, and all writers do in a sense, is to take a kind of tiny voltage that is in the present moment that they're detecting in things that are going on, and then just kind of put it through an amplifier and amp it up. And so, what could be the result of this if we really took it to the next kind of level? And I think, you see Aldous Huxley doing that with uh, um, new advances in genetics and in that type of science. And you see it further back with H.G. Wells looking at planetary discoveries that were going on in his lifetime and thinking, well, what if there are these terrible beings on Mars that came down and waged war on us and treated us the way that the British Empire has treated people in other countries? That is actually true, that he was using War of the Worlds, H.G. Wells, as a kind of metaphor for British imperialism. It was on his mind. So we take things that are happening to us and we project them into the future. We kind of increase the voltage, we make them bigger, and we make guesses based, I suppose guesses based on that, but fictions is the word for them. And some of those come true and some of them don't. And when they don't, we just kind of ignore it. And when they do, we say, wow, that person predicted the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah,
Some
we do that,
authors
don't we?
actually are more on the money than others. J.G. Ballard apparently is one who's had more predictions come true than almost any others. I wouldn't have thought that. I think of him as a more literary kind of
Yeah.
writer, but it's interesting.
It is interesting, and you've put me in mind of Karen Howe's book, The Empire of AI, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but she's written that recently, looking at Sam Altman and the tech bros, and she draws a fascinating parallel with the British Empire. I'm just taking your empire point here, and the East India Company. She sort of sees the tech bros as the East India Company. She sees the American government as the British Empire effect, the British government, and and it's just really interesting to see how this race for power can really be, as you say, amplified. You amp it up and see what happens. So I haven't read the book myself. I've watched a few of her videos as she talks about it and she brings it to life. Definitely one for people to take a look at, I would say.
Yeah.
Now,
Heinlein, Robert Heinlein, the science fiction writer, predicted a future apparently in which 7 people would own all the wealth in the world. And now we have a thing called the Mag 7, Magnificent Seven, American stocks, who are 7 people who own all the wealth in the world. There's been this concentration of wealth happening. Actually, 2 of those are things that people like who do luxury goods, but 5 of them are tech stocks, and that was eerily prescient. Prescient is an interesting word because it's got science in it.
yes, it has, hasn't it?
Mm.
But also, just harking back to what you said there, they're luxury goods. 2 of them are luxury goods. 5 of them are tech
I think
companies.
one's luxury goods, one's probably a power company. Not quite sure.
Yeah. Okay. But to see luxury goods in there, that sort of echoes some of the political economists' arguments around, oh, it's okay, we're all going to be all right because people will spend so much money on luxury goods that and it'll all flow through. And all that we've got with the Jevons paradox and all that going on at the moment. I honestly, there's so much there to unpack. Probably the subject of another podcast, I expect.
Yeah.
Yeah, something I did want to ask you about, bringing it sort of down to earth from the scientific sort of approach and more macro down to micro, as you said earlier. And that is something when I'm speaking with people in positions of buying positions in learning, they're often wringing their hands, wondering how they are supposed to make a, a bet, if you like, really, a bet on an LMS at the moment, because the pace is so fast, isn't it, John? I mean, I just
Yeah.
look back a couple of years and I think, if I'd bought an LMS 2 years ago, it would be hopeless now, I suppose. So, have you got any advice for them in terms of how how do they go about it, or what should they bear in mind so they can sleep at night?
If I had any sound advice based on data and conversations with the right people, I would earn more money and my name would be Josh Burson. But I
You
think
just interview him.
a couple of reflections on that really are that obviously I've been in LearnTech since about 1999. The death of the LMS has been broadcast and forecast during most of those years, and stubbornly, it kind of still persists. There's a view that we're still going to need systems of record, and an LMS is a system of record. And all the developments in LMS technology have all really been about presentation layer, analytics layers, and so on, that kind of bolt onto that. It's difficult to foresee a way that we would get rid of that, because a company needs its records. It needs to certify compliance. It needs to know who's in the company. You wouldn't necessarily turn that kind of function over to something as probabilistic as AI. So it's still kind of going to go and sit there. I mean, what we see in the LMS market at the moment, I think, is people bolting AI on largely,
Yes, we hear
in
that.
intelligent ways, or just in opportunistic, rather kind of, what's the word, bricolage, sort of, jam these two things together and make it look like it's something exciting.
We hear
So,
that a lot, don't we, now? The phrase harness as a service,
oh, right, yeah,
which is about the ability to, integrate lots of other systems, third-party systems, so APIs that you can plug in, basically. I mean, I think of it still as plugging in
yeah,
these APIs to your LMS or your system or whatever platform you're running of any sort. Harness as a service is going to become a thing, or it's going to be a big investor
yeah.
attraction, I think. So that would make sense, wouldn't it? Perhaps. So it's probably that's probably as much as you'd be able to say, really, isn't it? Just to
Yeah,
prepare
also
yourself.
that those kind of SaaS models are under pressure, and we've seen that in the kind of, analysts taking against the stocks, and kind of stock prices tumbling for big SaaS providers, because so much of the kind of added value is in the consultancy add-on, the integration, services, and the presentation layer, and how you kind of get to the data. Well, if you can kind of rip SCORM and get inside with something like Talvi, maybe you've got less of a use for that, and there isn't much money in just selling people databases that work well.
No, that
Mm.
that went out of fashion a few years ago, didn't
Yeah,
it?
so I mean, there is a lot of change and turmoil there, but you've got to remember that with innovation, it's never just about capability. It's about adoption. It's about what is the market ready for? What are the behaviors? What are the cultures of the buyer companies? How do these fit in? And change there is much slower. It can be kind of
Yeah.
ghostly. I'd make one other point about the change in the market as well. It is true that we're experiencing rapid change at the moment. In LearnTech for years, for most of the 20 years I was in it, the frustrating thing about it was the lack of change. We'd go to Learning Technologies exhibition year after year and say, well, what is there new to talk about this year? I mean, bugger all, really. It's the same old, same old. And mobile learning just took ages to take off,
Yeah.
while we waited for Steve Jobs to invent the iPhone, and then suddenly it kind of went away. Everybody's ready for these things. It's only, I think, in the last year, just having done a Learning Technologies, recorded a load of interviews for the special, and having done the same thing the year before, I noticed a lot of real change there, not just AI included, but AI native companies, people coming through with new types of solution, and people beginning to think, oh yes, there really is change around here.
Yes. Well, it was interesting listening to Donald Taylor's survey report, wasn't it? I know you
Yeah,
had him on the show to talk about it as well. And he was unsurprised by the fact that AI was still at the top. In fact, there was a bit of a change there, wasn't there? I think AI was at the top, but it was a slightly different lens, I think. Was it?
yeah,
Am I right in thinking that? And also, um, personalization had been a big thing, hadn't it, for quite a long time?
yeah.
Uh, and it seems to be very popular again now. I mean, I don't know. Personalization, I love it, but I'm wondering how we're going to make that work at scale if we're not all if we don't have access to fantastic data. That's what bothers me. But with that, have you got any ideas on that?
Quality of data is a big problem. It will become a bottleneck because, data is locked up in lots of different systems. It isn't kind of uniformly kept and so on. Some people have a lot of belief in sophisticated types of agentic AI to be able to kind of bypass that and to deal with all that kind of complexity and mess. But my own kind of experiences of working with AI is that you have to get your ducks in a row as far as your file structure is concerned, or it just won't work. There is a nitty-gritty side to it, and that again is going to probably slow the pace of change. And IT professionals are very kind of methodical people. They like to have their ducks in a row, and there are massive security concerns emerging as well, more and more. So yeah, I slightly lost my thread there, Caroline. It does happen.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I know, because your mind's going off. So there's so many threads there to pick up. And
Yeah.
I think the one that I would like to chase up is that because you were touching there when you were talking about, these people like to have things in order. I really look a lot. I spend a lot of my time looking at job design and thinking about how it's such a huge thing for the organization to take on, in terms of saying, right, we're going to organize your job for you, we're going to keep on top of it, and we're going to keep telling you what your job is. I just don't really see that happening in the real world. I don't know even if it would happen in the science fiction world, John, but I know that people would, if they're trained how to, if they're shown how to, and they're enabled, they could manage to design that job themselves. They could keep a track of it, and they could say, right, well, look, here's my workflow that I'm working on. Here's a workflow. It doesn't matter what it is. Let's just say it's onboarding, right? And I'm going to look at all the tasks on here, and I'm going to share these tasks out to different zones of, AI capability, whatever. I might hand some completely to AI. Others I might keep completely for myself. And in zone 2 in the middle, I'll share it and I'll do some collaboration. That, by the way, of course, is something that's getting really popular now. So using it as a brainstorming partner almost.
Yeah. No, that's
So,
very insightful question, I
yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Because
So what do you think to that?
I think less and less over the last, even in the kind of pre 2022, we were less and less talking about jobs and more about tasks and skills and competences and capabilities, because there is awareness that kind of jobs are slightly atomizing a bit. And I think this has begun to happen already, because, the nature of organizational life has changed, and we're more globalized, dispersed, and with more working from home and so on, tends to pull that apart. So in a sense, it is about tasks, and I focus on workflow when I'm talking to people about how to do their podcast workflow and how to bring AI into it, because I'm aware that basically I do it all, but these jobs and roles will be parceled out to other people. However, having said that, I'm just going to argue completely against that, and say that AI weirdly is bringing in an idea of roles and hierarchy as important again, which in some ways is a bit worrying. And the reason I say that is because more and more people are saying that you can't introduce AI into an organization with a workflow and a structure and a scale without doing it from the top down. You can't do it bottom up. It has to come from the CEO downwards. And the organization will only move at the speed of the CEO's understanding of AI. Well, in one way, yes, that it's good that at last we've realized that, and people are taking steps to address it. On the other hand, it means that we're looking at a top-down transformation, and a completely top-down transformation. And this is liable to make organizations more interested in hierarchy. I've noticed as well another thing when I'm giving my talks about workflow. I do talk a lot about skills you'll need, and workflow is analysis of all the tasks you have to do and what you parcel out. But I also talk about roles, because if you're running a podcast, or a number of podcasts as I do, okay, you might need an editor, me, or you might need a graphic designer, Claude, or you might need all these things. You will also need a producer. You need somebody who has a kind of vision for the personality, brand, tone of voice, practice area, and all the specificities that go into giving that podcast a personality and a brand and so on. And that has to be with somebody, has to take those decisions, whether it's kind of you
Is that the
co-CEOs or
human in the loop?
co-producers. It's not a human in the loop, it's a human in charge, I'm afraid. I mean, I hate to be kind of hard and fast about it, but for me, it's like, because a podcast
Just promoted the human.
is a creative production, basically. The autonomy of the person who has the vision or is responsible for it, where the butt stops, in other words. When I put a podcast out, because I do it all myself, if there's a typo on LinkedIn or whatever, I'm to blame. If there's a dodgy edit, if there's some garbled audio, I'm to blame. There's kind of nowhere to hide in that situation. The only way that there is somewhere to hide is if I can blame it on an AI that did it, which occasionally I do. But that's no good. If you're responsible for a creative product like a podcast, you have to have autonomy. And my view of that is, you have to have agency. You have to be in charge of it. And my view of that is out of my cold dead hands. Am I giving that over?
Is this accountability that we're talking about?
Yes. Yeah, the same. You
The
could
same
call it
thing.
that as well, yeah.
Yeah.
You're accountable, because if you put out a podcast that says revolting and incendiary things, then you can't just step aside, This is the frustrating thing about a lot of tech bros, as far as we're concerned, is they will not take any responsibility for what
No.
happens on their social. And there are legal reasons for
Yeah.
that, to do with, American legislation and the get out clause that the internet was given very early on.
Do you see a quiet shift in accountability happening? Do you think that that's probably under the radar a bit at the moment?
I don't know. I think people will always try to shirk accountability, and I think the whole science of leadership is, in a way, about kind of, making the burden of accountability not too onerous, and we have lots of laws to kind of spread it out as well. I don't see any shift in those basic underlying human dynamics. I'm kind of rather cynical about the ability of technology to by itself make those kind of changes in the way humans think and feel, because I think that is a shirking of accountability. If we blame the AI, and say AI is doing terrible things, social media is doing terrible things. Well, it's not. There's a company behind that thing with autonomy and agency, and there's a person behind that company who should be held responsible. Don't
So,
blame the
yes.
technology.
Well, I quite agree with that, and that's where I would have sort of introduced the idea that maybe your employees need some enablement around this. They need to understand that this is about accountability. It's not about just shirking that, and not shirking. That's a bad word to use. It
Yeah,
sounds as though it's got blame in it, but just sloping shoulders, a bit of
over
sloping
the
shoulders.
shoulders. Yeah,
Because it's easy to do that, isn't it? To sort of say, "Oh, it wasn't me, it was it was the machine, it was that thing that said no. Sorry, the computer says no, goodbye,"
yeah.
um, kind of thing. And it's easy to do that, but the sort of actual status that I'm concerned with is where we don't see it. It's happening under the radar. And those decisions are being signed off by a machine rather than a human. And the power is moving, it's shifting within an organization. And if you leave it long enough, a lot of those shifts will result in a bit of it's like knitting coming undone or something like that. You tug at a strand and suddenly you realize there's nothing there. I won't
It,
mix my metaphors. I nearly said standing on quicksand.
well, I'll add another one: death of a thousand cuts. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Death of a thousand bad cuts if you're delegating your editing. Yes, I'm really keen on I was talking to my daughter about this, who's an illustrator and, quite a lovely artist, about micro decisions. And what brought this home to me was I saw a clip on YouTube of this is going to sound like a terribly bougie reference, I'm afraid, but a Nouvelle Vague film by Francois Truffaut called Day for Night, which was about the business of making movies. And there's this wonderful scene where he kind of walks onto the set in the morning. And before he can even get to the set, he's stopped by somebody who says, "Do you want the red car or do you want the blue car?" And he says, "The red car is too blur, and the red car is too blur. Whose car is that over there?" He says, "It's mine." "Oh, we'll use that one." And then as he walks through the set towards the position where he'd take up his directorial role, he's just plagued with people coming up and saying, like, "This coat or this coat? How do you want the blah, blah, blah? When do you want to..." Micro
Thousands of
decisions, decision after decision after. Anybody who's directed a film will be aware of this. Maybe some managers and leaders will have gone through this as well. The constant micro decisions you have to make in furtherance of an overall bigger project. And what AI can tend to do, if you're not careful, is to chip away at all of those. It says,
Yes.
the AI. I had an example of this the other day when I had one of those blow your hair back moments where I've always done the graphics for my podcast releases, the little square one that appears on your Apple Podcasts and the widescreen one that appears on YouTube. I've always done those in Final Cut Pro because I hate Photoshop. And then I moved to Pixelmator, which I got free with a subscription from Apple, and started painfully trying to teach myself enough to do these graphics with that. And then just in frustration the other day, I said to co-work, "Look, can you do these?" And it said, "Yep, what do you want to do next?" And there they were.
Oh, no, it's done.
But there was
Yeah.
one little detail in them, one font, which is the typeface, which just wasn't right. And I said, what's happened with that? And it said, "Well, you don't own that. You don't have a license for that font. So I've given you something that looks a bit like it." And I thought, am I going to be able to tell it's going to be that big? And it didn't look too bad. And in the end, I said, "Yeah, okay, go on then." But that kind of thing niggles me. It might just be because I'm a control freak.
What, because it didn't ask you mean? Because it
No,
just
not
did it
because it
anyway?
didn't ask me. I wasn't worried about the AI because it did, it does evals. You get to learn this stupid language, evaluations. And one of those is we're going to, because you put in the way that you set up your co-work, you give it files about what your rules are, what you want, what you don't want. We're going to give you an eval by eyeball. In other words, we'll show it to you and you look before you say go ahead.
Yes.
And that's what I've kind of written into my working practices with co-work. So I had to eyeball it. I made the decision, but it was largely one of convenience, I have to say. If I was being really, really scrupulous, I wouldn't allow that out.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because co-work, I've just got co-work. I don't know if you can see I've got the Mac Mini box at the back of me, and I've unpacked the whole thing. Well, I was a bit nervous about putting it onto my main machine, so so I put it onto the Mac Mini, and there's lots of advantages, but I'm also a bit concerned that, as you say, it's starting to get very convenient to just say, yeah, go with that.
Yeah.
John Helmer, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much. And I wish you all the very best with the launch on the 22nd of May. And where will that podcast be out? I presume on Apple and Spotify. And
yeah, initially the Tech Imaginarium will run on the same feed as Learning Hack at the moment, just for this first 6 episodes. We'll also be starting up its own feed that you can subscribe to, so we can run it back to back if we manage to kind of do more next season. But it's working out so well. I'm so pleased with what work Esri's doing on this and everything, that I've got high hopes for it. Thank you very much, Carolyn, by the way. It's been great to have this opportunity to gas on about myself.
Yeah, yeah, I know you're always very generous in hosting other people on your program, but this has been your opportunity to talk as well. So thank you so much, John. Lots to think about now, and I have an article to write about it. So I shall see everybody next week on next Wednesday with my next guest. And as John's already mentioned, a couple of people who are coming on the show very soon. But in the meantime, have a great week, and I'll see you next Wednesday.